Hey everyone, welcome to day 15. And today we will be learning about event loop and browser storage, and we'll also be building a dark and light theme within our portfolio. And this time we'll be using a button to toggle between the different themes. So I hope you guys are doing good, and I hope you had a wonderful time going through the weather app and understanding, the different ways by which we can get external data, use it in our app, and build, useful things. You can let me know in the comments. How has your experience been? Yeah, I'm doing much better compared to last time. Uh, Still a bit under the weather, but yeah, I'm doing good. Okay, thanks for asking. Let's get started with today's lesson. So, to begin with, we'll look at event loops. So, I'll just start with, let me do the initial setup for everything. Okay, so, anyways, let's look at the event loop. Let me add all of the files. So, let's add a script tag. Okay, and let me set the to main.js. All right. So far what we have seen is as we are okay, give me a second. Sorry about this. All right. Yeah. So as we so the browser has many responsibilities. So for example, for showing the UI, it has a rendering engine. Similarly, for executing JavaScript, it uses a JavaScript engine, right? So, and for fetching external data, it has some tool which some program running which is responsible for getting allowing us to talk to that resource, let us know when the response is available. So behind the scenes, a browser is doing many things, right? So it's not just it's running the JavaScript. It's also responsible for rendering the UI, um, executing the JavaScript, and all the other activities which are needed in order for a website to run. So to understand this better, let's look at a simple diagram which I had prepared. So a browser consists of, like I said, multiple things. So it has a rendering engine which is responsible for, uh, displaying items to the UI. So for example, let's consider a flow where we are, we want to display some information that we're getting from an external service. So the JavaScript engine will, talk to the component which is responsible for fetching external data. It will use the fetch API, which will in turn tell this component to, get that resource. And once the response is available, this component will, let the JavaScript engine know that the response is available. Once this is known to the JavaScript engine, right, the part which is responsible for executing our JavaScript, right, it will tell that information to the talk to the rendering engine, and it will display that change on the UI. Now what we're interested in right now is the JavaScript engine. Okay, so the way this JavaScript engine works is that it executes the JavaScript in a single threaded manner. So what that means is that um, only one line of code can be executed at any given point of time, right? So that is what is meant by single threaded. And it is, the execution is synchronous in nature. So what that means is that the code execution happens, one line after the other, and it happens in order. Okay, so let's take an example. Let's take a look of an example of how we can do this. So we have this, these log statements. So console.log, first, right? Console.log, second, and similarly, we have the third statement, right? Let me open this on the website, and let's open the developer tools. Okay. So for everything, I'm getting a delay on the screen, which I'm sharing with you guys. Anyways, so you can see that we can see all of these log statements, right? So that is what is meant by, that it's single threaded, right? So it is able to execute one piece of code at a time, and that it is synchronous in nature. That means one line is executed in the order, all the statements are executed in the order that they are written. Now we have looked at examples where, code execution has been happening asynchronously. So for example, when we are writing a whenever we are responding to a click event, right? Whenever we are clicking on a button, okay, we don't know when that event will occur, but the handler associated with that gets executed, right? So this, it is somewhat asynchronous in nature. Okay. uh, Similarly, if we use a timeout function, set timeout function, so the code execution happens asynchronously in that case also. And similarly, if we fetch a HTTP resource, that execution also happens asynchronously. So how is all this, uh, you know working? How is it possible that something which is synchronous in nature and, single threaded, how is that able to, execute the code asynchronously? Let's understand that. So what we know so far is that, suppose we have this event, right? Document dot add event listener. We look for the DOM content loaded. Once this happens, we want to do certain things. Let me add a button over here. Let's give it the text click me, and let's give it an ID, clickable. Okay. All right. So um, so we have this function over here which will get executed when that event occurs. Now let's get that element by ID clickable, right? And let's add an event listener on click, and let me create a function const handle click. Okay. And we want to do something like, you know let's create an element, or rather we'll come to that later on. Let's do a log statement over here. Button clicked, for example. Okay. Now suppose we have a, yeah, I need to pass the event handler over here, handle click. Okay. Now suppose we have a, a function which is running in the which is running and which is running for a duration of 3 seconds. So let's implement such a function which does that. But let's just check if it's working correctly. All right, so when we're clicking on this button, it is logging button clicked. Now this is happening asynchronously, right? This function gets called when this event occurs. Now suppose we have you know a function which is um, taking a lot of time to execute. All right, so let's create a function, long running function. Okay, and what we will do over here is we will say while, let's create a variable duration. Okay, and duration is date dot now plus 300 milliseconds. Okay, something like this. And we will check while whatever is the current date, whatever is the current time, if that is less than or equal to the duration, we will run this while loop. Okay, and once it is done, it will move out of this while loop. So the execution will keep on going on for a duration of 3 seconds, right? So let's call this function as well. So long running function, let's call this. All right, okay, and let me add a log statement over here. Log long running function started and long running function ended. Okay, console.log. All right, so you can see that it has printed this, and after a duration of 3 seconds it is printing this statement. Now let me just do a quick reload and let me get rid of all the breakpoints. All right, okay, so suppose I do a refresh. So this long running function is being executed, and in the meantime I'm doing performing a click. All right, so you can see that the long running function, even though it was called after adding this event listener, and while this function is being executed, all of the I was clicking the buttons while the execution was going on, but only once the execution ended, then we were able to see all of these log statements. So the reason why it is behaving like this is because we have something known as the uh, event queue, right? So whenever the user is clicking on a button, all right, uh, that piece of code, that event, and the function executed, the function which is associated with that event, it isn't executed immediately, right? uh, because the part which is responsible for Since the JavaScript engine is synchronous in nature, all of the asynchronous events such as click, timeouts, and fetch requests, they're handled by other components within the browser. And when those conditions are satisfied, right? For example, when the click event happens, um, it that event is not informed to the JavaScript immediately. It is added to something known as the event queue. All right. So because of that, what happens is whatever function is being executed currently, that continues to execute, and the JavaScript engine only looks at the event queue once it is done with executing all the currently running functions. So if you guys remember that, whenever a function is called, right, an execution context is created and it is loaded on a stack, right? uh, a stack is created, and so we have something like a call stack, right? So the focus on the JavaScript engine is only going through executing code which is on the call stack, and only once the execution of the call stack is done, it looks at the event queue. Okay, it sees that there is an event available in the event queue, and only once uh, then it sees that there's a function associated with that event, it will try and load that function onto the call stack and then execute that function and then move on to the next function or next event in the event queue. So let's understand this a bit more, in a much better fashion. That suppose we have a function, right? Const some function. Okay, and this will in turn call another function. Okay, and which in turn basically calls our long running function. Okay, and let me do a log over here, another function loaded, and this calls another function, and we will call um, some function from here. Okay, all right. Let's take a look at the source tab. Let's open our main.js. Let me expand this. Okay. And let me add some breakpoints. So this is our handle click, and let me add a breakpoint over here before it, the while loop begins. So let's do a refresh, and you can see over here in the call stack, right? So whenever a function is being executed, right, its execution context is created, and you can see that it is, it stacks all of the functions which have been executed. Okay, and it only removes that function of the stack or pops it off the stack once the function execution has been once the function execution is over. So over here this statement was executed, then we called some function, right, which in turn called another function, and this in turn called the long running function. So the execution right now is at this point, we're inside the long running function, and if we take a look at the call stack, the first function to be called is some function, right? Since it in turn calls another function which in turns call this, the code execution for this has not ended. Okay, and so all of these functions are now in the call stack. Now while I am, let me go ahead. Now in the meantime, the execution is going on and I'm clicking on these buttons, right? So 3 seconds have passed and only then it's allowing me to, you know uh, only then this call is coming inside this handle click, right? It's not coming immediately. So in the meantime, this function is being executed. What is happening is that the browser is telling, okay, that the click event has happened. All right. Then then JavaScript checks whether it's interested in the click event or not. And since it is interested, that particular event is added to the event queue. Now, till the time this function is being executed, okay, uh, we can see that, you know, uh, that click event, the code associated with the click event, it is not being called. All right. So only once the execution has ended, right, then we see this log statement that this button has been clicked. So let's understand this with the help of a diagram, right? So we see that the long running function is in the, call stack. In the meantime, whenever the user has clicked on it, that particular click event has been added to this event queue, right? Now, once it completes, execution of that function. Now, once this has been popped off the stack, then it looks what are all the events which are available in the event queue. So it sees, for example, this click event, right? Then it notices that there is a function associated with this. There's a handler associated with this event, which is this one, right? Handle click. So what it does is that it adds this function to the call stack, right? And it begins executing this function. Now, once the execution of this function is done, it checks whether, there any other function which needs to be executed, or if there are more items in the, event queue. So for example, it finds that, a timeout has occurred. Okay. And similarly, it it checks whether if there's any function is associated with that, any once the timeout is over, do we need to call any function? So that function would be, added over here. So this process of, continuously monitoring the event queue, okay, and adding that function associated with that event to the call stack, this is known as the event loop, right? So it's continuously, the JavaScript engine is continuously monitoring the event queue, and it will basically check whether, certain events have occurred in the background while, code was being executed, right? So um, because of this, we get the impression that, code execution is happening synchronously, but in the background what happens is, whenever asynchronous events happen, right? For example, fetching data, or the user clicks on some element, or for example, we use something like a set timeout, all of those events are added to the event queue. Once JavaScript is done executing whatever is there in the call stack, once the call stack is empty, the JavaScript engine checks the event queue. Okay, it sees that, okay, there's a click event which happened, right? Then it loads the handler associated with that, executes that code, removes that, event, moves on to the next event in the queue. Okay, so for example, another click has happened. Similarly, it will load the function associated with that, and, pop that function out of the stack, get done with the event queue, move on to the next function in the event queue, the next event in the event queue, execute the function associated with that event, and so on. The process continues basically. So that is how we are able to get this kind of behavior where we are able to feel that our code is being executed asynchronously, but by default the JavaScript engine executes all of the code synchronously and in a single threaded manner. It is because of these other components, right, which are monitoring things like HTTP requests, letting the um, you know uh, talking to the JavaScript engine, letting it know that behind the scenes while you are executing code in the call stack, this event has happened, and it will add those notifications in the event queue. All right. So let's take a look at a few more examples. So suppose we have a function which is having a timeout. All right, so let's create a function with timeout. Okay, and let's just say set timeout function timer. Okay, and let's just log I am called after a delay, right? And let's give a delay of 2000 milliseconds, which is equivalent to 2 seconds. And now let's call this function with timeout. Okay, all right, and let's come back over here and let's get rid of all the breakpoints. Okay, and you can see that over here, uh, till the time this function has finished executing, only after a duration of 2 seconds, then we see this log statement over here, right? So the same thing is happening over here, basically, that while the code was being executed, the long running function, right? So we have the long running function, and we have some function over here, and similarly we have another function. So this is how the call stack is looking right now. Okay, now once this function is done executing, it will be popped off the stack, right? In the meantime, the the function which is associated with this. So let me move this over here and let's take a look what happens even now. So you can see that even though we called this function first, let's add a log statement called with a timer. Okay, so you can see called with a timer is logged first, then another function is loaded and the long running function starts, right? And then only after the execution for this has ended, then we see the statement, right? So what is happening is the call stack looks like this, right? We have some function which calls another function, which in turns calls the long running function. In the meantime, the first thing which has happened over here is this, basically, that uh, function with timeout, that was the first function which was available in the call stack, right? So this was the first function which was loaded in the call stack. Then it saw that it has this piece of code. It called a timeout, right? So this is some sort of an asynchronous event. It knows that it cannot execute it directly, so there's a separate component which is responsible for this. uh, I'm not going into a lot of details what are the other components, but just understand for now that there is something else which is responsible for starting a timer of with a delay of 2 seconds. And uh, so this piece of code is executed, and this function is only called once that delay of 2000 milliseconds has gotten over. So this function is executed, and then it is popped off the stack. Then the next statement to get executed is some function, so it is loaded onto the stack. Then it calls another function which is loaded onto the stack, and then similarly it calls long running function. In the meantime, while this function is executing, right, so the timer, you know uh, it is probably over, the timeout has occurred. So it is notified, that event is added in the event queue that the timeout is over. All right, now once it has done executing all of these functions and they have been popped off the stack, right, uh, then it checks, okay, this is the function which is there in the event queue. It calls the timer function, right? It loads that onto the stack, it executes it, and that is when we actually see I am called after a delay, right? So that is how this event is being handled. So what is of importance over here is that whatever code is executed over here, that is blocking in nature, right? So if there's a really long function which takes a long time to execute, the event loop will be ignored, right? But suppose we get rid of this while loop over here. You can see that if we do a refresh now, you can see that the timeout is being called much faster, right? Relatively much faster, because the long running function isn't taking much time. Okay, it's directly being called after a delay of 2 seconds. Whereas earlier what was happening was that it was waiting for this function to execute, and it was executing for a duration of 3 seconds, right? So the code which is in the call stack, it is blocking in nature, right? And it's blocking in nature because it prevents JavaScript from executing any other code. Similarly, that is why when we have this piece of code, right? So suppose I do a refresh and I do a click me, you can see that instantaneously we're getting this button clicked event. All right, this is instantly being logged to the console. Whereas when we had this while loop and the call stack was taking a bit of time, so you can see that even though I clicked on the, let me click on this button, it's not, going through, right? Because it's just not registering that part. Okay, so that is why it is important that we do not have functions which take so much time to execute. Um, and this is how JavaScript, we get the impression that JavaScript supports asynchronous code execution, but behind the scenes this is what is happening, right? So similarly, I mean, we have something like this, that it loads the timer function, then moves on to the next thing. So even if we have a HTTP request, for example, which has happened behind the scenes while this code was being executed, an event for that would have been added in the event queue, and then it would execute the function associated with that, right? That is what would happen. Okay, so that is how the event queue, I mean, that is what is the purpose of the event queue. And this is the entire concept of event loop, where it is continuously being monitored. The event queue is continuously being monitored, and once all of the functions which have been executed on the call stack, Once they have been popped off, then the event queue is checked and the handler associated with that event is loaded in the call stack, and then it is executed. So execution always happens in the call stack, right? Execution context is created, it is loaded in the stack. But behind the scenes, when whenever code is being executed, they are added in the event queue. So this is how JavaScript behaves asynchronously in nature, whereas it in reality it isn't. All right. So I know it's a bit difficult to digest it, but I hope with the help of the diagrams it was a bit clear to you guys, and you can go through the call stack, try out these examples, add log statements and see how it is behaving. Okay, it should help you to get started. All right. uh, so there are, like I said, there are more components available, like the micro queue and event queue. There are more things. I'm not going into detail right now as to what those are. You can go through the resources and check out. So there's another very good website which basically allows us to visualize this information. All right, let's just check that out very quickly. So we have this website. Okay, so over here you can see that there is a button over here, and within the button there's a timeout part, and we are also directly calling set timeout over here, and we have some code over here, console.log hi. So let me just um, increase the delay so that you guys can see everything properly. So this is basically some jQuery code which is handling, this is just a function which gets called whenever this button is clicked. So let's see how this is behaving. So you can see that this function is loaded on the call stack, then it informs that this event is, it is basically a functionality which is provided. Then in the meantime there's this timeout. Once the timeout is over, right, it the function associated with that is added to the callback queue, and once the call stack is empty, whatever is there in the queue is loaded onto the stack. So let's take a look once again. I click on this click me button. Let me just run this. I click on this click me, right? So you can see that while the code was being executed, it added that event onto the queue. Okay, once all of the code has been executed, welcome to the loop. So this is the last statement. The timeout has been done. Then we can see that this log statement is executed. Then it sees that there's this click button over here. Once there was nothing on the call stack, it executed this event, and you can see that this timeout was executed. And that is how you can visually see, right? So you can try out this example from this website. It's also available in the resources associated with this assignment. Okay. So once again, we are seeing all of this. We see the high statement being printed. Then it executes this statement. There's a timeout. It's waiting for the timeout to get over. In the meantime, this log statement is executed, and the timeout is over. It was added to the callback queue. Okay, and then we basically see all of that. So you can try this out and get a better understanding of what all of this is, and you can look up what is exactly the micro task queue. There are lots of things, lots of different components. I just wanted to give you a high level overview as to what is the event loop, what is the event queue. So there are different types of queues available. Now let's look at the next topic, which is basically browser storage, right? So let me close this and let's create a new file, browser storage.js. So sometimes we want to store certain information uh, right within our browser. Okay, so for example, we have a an input field. All right, and it has an ID, name, and it has a name and a name like this. Let's give it a placeholder, enter your name. Okay, and let's add a button over here, save name. All right, and let's give it an ID, save. Let's link this new JavaScript file to the document. So browser storage, and let's comment out the existing one. And what we want to do is document.add event listener, DOM content loaded. Once this event has happened, we register for the click event. So document.get element by ID, save, and then we add the click event listener on this. And once this event occurs, we want to basically read the name value. All right, so we'll say document dot get element by ID, and the name of the element is name, right? And we want to basically read its value. So const name equals this, and let's log this in the console like this. So I'll enter my name, Gaurav, for example, and when I click on save name, you can see that whatever is the value over here, it is logged to the console. Now suppose what I want to do is whenever this page is refreshed, I want to show this name by default. Okay, so we have different storage options available with this, which are provided by the browser. So let's take a look at the first one. Okay, the first one is the session storage. It is a function which is this API is uh, available. You can call this function on the window object, right? So what we will do over here is we will say session storage dot, either you can say window dot session storage, but since this is defined on the window, we can directly write session storage dot set item. So it accepts a key value pair. All right, the key is a string and the value is also a string. So let's say I want to save the name with the key name and the value as whatever we're getting from the input element, right? So like this, I am saving this information. Okay, let me enter my name, and if you go to the applications tab, right, and you can see that there is something known as the session storage, and it is associated, and there's an entry associated with the domain, right? So all of these storages, there's a local storage as well as a session storage. So all of these storages are associated with a particular domain. So right now this is our domain, right? Local host and port number, so and so. So what I do is Suppose I click on save name now, right? So you can see that there's an entry available, and the value is Gaurav. Okay. Now what we want to do is whenever we do a page refresh, uh, this information, this this text field should come pre-populated. Right now, whenever I'm doing a refresh, it gets reset, right? So let's see how we can make use of session storage and set that information. So we will say document dot get element. Let me just copy this statement over here from here and add it here, right? Dot value is equal to session storage dot get item, right? Name, if it is there, it will set that, and if nothing is there, right, we will just set this to an empty string like this. Okay, and let's come back to the code over here. Let's do a refresh. You can see that since this key is available in the session storage, this code was executed, right? It checked whether this items is available, so it was, and the value is this. So when we say get item, and we get the item with the matching key, it returns the value from the session storage. Since it was available, it was set to the value. Now let me click on delete, and now if I do a refresh, it is not there. So suppose I provide the value like Devsnest, I click on save name, right? This is there. Now I'm manually deleting this. If I do a page refresh, you can see that Devsnest has been loaded inside this input tag, right? So this is a storage which is available right in the browser, right? uh, and this is the session storage. Now there's another storage option available to us known as the local storage. Let's see if you know what is the value with that. So there are some default values over here. Let me delete this one. This is probably coming from some other application, but let's see. Let me delete this as well. And suppose what I want to do is, instead of uh, actually before moving on to the local storage, let's see what is meant by a session. So a session basically represents the duration for which this particular tab is open, the tab associated with this domain, right? That particular website, how long is that open? So that is represented by a session, right? So for example, I close this tab, right? Let me save this. Okay, you can see that this key is available, and as I told you, the session is available only as long as this tab is open associated with this domain. That is the lifetime of a session. Okay, if I close this, and if I once again say localhost 5500 like this, okay, and if I see the session storage right now, you can see that the key is missing, right? That's because when I closed that particular tab, the session associated with this domain, that was over. All right, so the session storage lasts, it stores something in the browser storage only as long as the session is alive. All right, once we close a tab, the session ends. So that is why even the storage associated with that session is lost. So that is what happened basically when I closed it. Now suppose you want this name to be stored permanently. Even after you close this tab, you want that name to be shown to you, right? So what we do is we make use of the local storage, right? We replace this with the local storage. Okay, and let's go to the application tab. Let's take a look at the local storage. Let me enter a name, for example, Gaurav. When I click on save name, now it's no longer being added in the session storage, it's being added in the local storage, right? So you can see that over here that this key is there. If I do a refresh, the value is still available. If I close the document and if I open it once again, localhost 5500, you can see that it's still loading that name from the local storage. So you can understand that the difference between session storage and local storage is that local storage will persist that information even after a browser you know tab has been closed. It remains in the memory of the browser. Okay, even if I close this browser, right, and I open this once again, okay, and you can see that if I say 5500 over here, that name is still available, right? So as long this is there in the uh, you know in the browser, it will be shown over here. There are multiple ways of clearing a session storage. One is that you explicitly delete it over here by right clicking on this value. The second way would be that you clear the browser cache, right? So all of the local storage and everything, all of it is cleared. So in that scenario also, this information is cleared, right? And you can also clear it programmatically. So for example, you can do something like local storage dot clear, right? And if I click on clear, if I execute this function and if we take a look at the application tab, you can see that all of the entries have been cleared. If we do a refresh, this is gone, right? So a similar functionality is also there on the session storage object. So you can see these are all the functions. We have clear item, clear for clearing the entire storage, get item to get an item with the matching key name. Key gives us the keys which are available. Length gives us all the entries which are there in the. Then we use set item to set a specific you know entry, and then remove item is to target a specific key. So suppose I have multiple keys with me, right? Let me go to the application tab. Let's add a key over here. So for example, name Gaurav, okay, and last name, send like this, okay. And suppose I want to remove this. Let me just check where. Yes, local storage. So suppose I would just want to remove the key with the matching name, so I can do something like local storage dot. So let's oops, not like this, wrong function. Let me just add it once again, name Gaurav, and then last name, send like this. All right, so we say local storage dot remove item, and we pass the name of the key. So I just want to remove the name key, for example. So if we go to the local storage, we can see that last name is still there, but that particular key was removed, right? So these are the different functions which are available. Similar to this, we have something known as web SQL and index db. So it allows us to store information using a SQL kind of a syntax. It allows us to query things. It basically behaves like a mini database right within your browser. But I will not go into that right now, because you guys will be learning about, what are queries, how to write queries, and all of those things when you learn about backend. And that is when you understand all of the constructs. Once you're familiar with that, uh, you can, the way of accessing all of this, querying data, all of that is quite similar to that. So you can revisit that topic once you have done that part in the backend part of the course. Okay. So, applications of these are, whenever you're using something like Gmail, right? You log in once, and when you revisit that URL, right, you don't have to log in again. That's because it is storing something in your local storage. So you can try something like this, that you clear your local storage manually, and then once you log in, you clear your local storage associated with Gmail, right? You will see an entry over here for Gmail. If you clear the local storage and you revisit Gmail, it will ask you to log in once again, because that information that you are logged in and all of the mechanism associated with that is generally stored in the local storage, right? So you try and clear local storage and session storage after you log in, and if you do a refresh or if you go visit that website again, it will ask you to log in once again. So this is an example of that. There's a question when we open a new tab. So basically, since is the session storage duplicated, right, when you open a new tab, right? So the answer is yes. It is available because you are opening the same URL, and that URL is already active in one place. So if I replace this once again with the session storage, right, and let me say Gaurav over here and say save name, we can see that it's there over here in the session storage. And let me just copy this URL, add this, open this in another tab, right? So basically you can see that it's, creating a new session. So even in this scenario, so the session is not lasting. Basically, there are ways to sync this, information across different sessions, but I'll not go into that. But if we were using a local storage, it would work. So once again, just to clarify, that a session is, specific to a browser instance. So I opened this over here, it did not. So so that is what happens when you use session storage, right? And what are you saying if you say something like this, right? So that session information isn't available. Like I said, it's specific to that. And so each new browser instance represents a new session. Okay, if you were to do something like this using local storage, right, if I save Gaurav to local storage, and if I enter this over here, you can see that this information is there in the local storage of the new tab as well. No matter how many tabs I open, right, it will be there. But in case of session storage, it's not like that. Okay, so I hope you guys are clear with, session storage and local storage. um, let's take a short break over here, and if you guys have any doubts, you can try and you can ask me your questions in the comment. Okay, so there's a question that by right clicking on the tab, can you duplicate it? Let's see. So let me put this back over here. Okay, save name. Then you're saying that duplicate this, and in that case it is doing that. But if you are manually opening it, it doesn't work like that. So the mechanism is different. It is basically, you know, creating a copy of this and syncing all of the, session storages. So that functionality is different. When you do it like this, when you duplicate a tab and you do it like that, that behavior is different compared to when you just reopen a new session. So this is a new session and you're duplicating this session, right? So that is the difference between the two. Okay. Are there any more questions you can ask in the chat? Okay, so no questions. Um, so also we used to have something, I mean, we have something known as cookies, right? Uh, but that is something which will make much more sense when you guys learn about the backend, because the real use case for using cookies is when you are, you know, serving some data from a server, sending some information to the client, to the browser, and then that cookie is, once again returned back to the server from the client with some information. But it makes sense to, understand what cookies are when you guys are learning about backend. So for now, I'm not covering this topic as of now. So there's a question: is the topics of JavaScript complete? There are a couple of more topics, but and another app that we will be building, and then we'll start with React. But you can think that, yeah, majority of the concepts are done. Just a few small topics are remaining, and then we'll begin with React after building another big app. Just using vanilla JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So the first app that we built was the weather app. There's another slightly, a bigger project compared to the weather app that we will be building, uh, based on the coming topics that we will be learning in the sessions which are yet to come. So you can expect that around a week we'll work more on the JavaScript, and after that we'll begin with the basics of React and move on to more complex and advanced topics in React. Okay. Yeah, we can build, right? And you are saying that is what I'm trying to cover. Since you guys do not know backend, I'm trying to teach you apps that you can uh, build without knowing backend right now. Okay. Let's let's try to build a dark. Let's try and add a dark theme to our portfolio. It's been a while since we have worked on on the portfolio website. Let's add a button which will basically toggle the theme. So by default, we had already implemented certain functionality, right, with regards to the theming. So let me open the code associated with that. Let me close the VS Code. Let me stop this and let's open the code which is associated with that portfolio. Hmm. So I have it with me. All right. So we have this is our portfolio. Let me run this. Okay. And let's close all of these tabs. So you can see this is what the portfolio looks like right now. And let me just clear the local storage. Okay, and the session storage, because as I mentioned, we are seeing all of these values because they are related to a domain. So the domain was same between both the previous app and this portfolio. Both of them were hosted on localhost 5500, right? So I'm just clearing these values manually for now. Okay, let's do a refresh. So if you guys remember, we had implemented the dark and light theme, but it was based on using the prefers color scheme, using the media query. So this is the code. Let me shrink this a bit. And we had done that part using media queries, right? So if you remember, we had added this media query which was telling us that if we prefer the color scheme dark, we would change the values of the custom properties that we had defined at the root level. So these were some of the properties that we had defined at the root level, right? Which is nothing but the HTML tag. And then when the media scheme was dark, we would replace these values with the darker shades. And then we were using all of these variables uh, at the body level. We were setting the background color, the text color, and all of those things. And whenever we wanted to test this out, we were going to the rendering mode, and we were selecting uh, emulate CSS media type, not this one, sorry, prefers color scheme. So right now it is night time. That is why the default preference is dark. If I want to switch it to light, I can do that with the help of Chrome. If I switch this to light, you can see that uh, we have this light theme being applied. If I change it back to dark, all of that was happening using media queries. So what we will do is we will provide both the functionalities now. That we will have a button which will be used to toggle between the different light and dark modes, and at the same time respect the you know the uh, the thing which is coming from the operating system, the color preference, the theme preference which is coming from the operating system. So let's take a look at how we can implement that. All right, so I'll go to the code for the portfolio. Let's create a new file over here. Let's call it theme.js, and let's link it to our document theme.js like this. And what we will do is this is our navigation bar, right? Let's add a button over here. So this is the default nav which is shown for screen resolutions which are higher than 650. and this is the mobile navigation, right? So if I change the dimensions, you can see that we have the mobile navigation, right? uh, let's add this in the default nav, which is visible to us right now. So what we will do is, let's create a section. Okay, the first section has all the information, which are the links, and the next section will have the uh, the button. Let's give it a id. Let's call it theme switcher. Okay, and we won't provide a text right now. And let's do one thing. uh, let's modify the style so that this button is appearing over here. Let's go to the styling part, and let's so we can see that the margin has been lost between all of the links, so let's fix that. So the margin is back. And what we want to do is, we want to show the links at one end and this button at another end. So what we will do is, so this is the class associated with the default navigation. Let's take that over here, and we will say dot default nav. We will say display flex, right? So now all of both the elements are on the same line. What we want to do is, we want to say justify content, and we want to say space between. Okay, so this has moved to the end, and this is at another end. uh, and first, let's show the light and dark button. We want to show the text light when the dark theme has been applied, and we want to show the text light sorry, we want to show the text dark when the light theme is there, right? So let's go to theme.js. We'll say document.add event listener dom content loaded, and then let's add a event handler for that. And what we want to do is, we want to basically fetch the media preference, right? So we have a function available to us known as window dot match media, right? So let's make use of that. Window dot match media. And what this function allows us to do is that we can write media queries over here as a string. So we are interested in knowing whether the user prefers this, whether this media query is there and whether its value is true or not. Okay, this is what match media will allow us to do, whether a media query has been applied, right? So we will provide that media query over here. Okay, and let's log this in the console right now. Let's see what is being returned. So you can see that we are getting this media query list. We have this media query which we had specified over here, and there's this matches property, right? So whenever this is true, right, since its value is true right now, that means that this media query, whatever are the styles inside this media query, they are being applied. Okay, so what we want to do is, let's take this in a variable const theme preference dark equals this variable, I mean whatever is the value returned by this function. If theme preference dark dot matches, right, it will give us a true or false. What we want to do is, we want to get the button, right? So Let's do that. Say document dot get element by id theme switcher, right? Let's store that in a variable. Let's assign the value over here. And what we want to do is theme switcher dot text content equals actually let's use a ternary operator over here. We can do is theme preference dark dot matches, then we show the text light, otherwise we show the text dark. Okay, let's save this, and you can see that right now, since the theme preference is dark, we are seeing the text light. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is whenever we are clicking on this button, we want to toggle the theme between light and dark, right? So what we will do is we will define some styles over here. All right. So by default, what we will do is we will add a body dot dark theme. We will create a new class known as dark theme, and we will target the body tag when the dark theme has been applied to it, and we will basically copy the same values which we had set under the dark scheme preference. Let's add those values over here. Okay, and similarly we want to respect the default operating system preference when the user has not clicked on this button yet, right? So what we will do is we will say body dot light theme. Okay, this thing we will add inside this preference since we are targeting just the dark theme, right? So we are inside the dark theme, but if the user clicks on this button, this media query, this media query condition will be satisfied and all the styles inside this will be loaded, right? So we will set the light theme class to the body element, and we will whatever were the default values for the light scheme, right? So we will set those inside the light theme like this, and we are not doing anything with the secondary color, so we will add it over here. Now when we are clicking on this button, okay, so we will define a function over here. Let's call it as switch theme. Okay, and what we want to do is if the theme preference dark is being matched, right? If this preference matches, okay, what we want to do is we want to toggle between the light and the dark theme. So we will just say document dot get document dot body dot class list dot toggle. Okay, and we will toggle the class light theme. Okay, else we will basically toggle the class dark theme, right? Give me a second. You guys are not able to see the button, right? Sorry about that. Okay. So hopefully you can see the button now. Okay. And so I've created this function, and what we want to do is theme switcher dot add event listener. Click whenever that event occurs. We want to call the theme switch function, switch theme function. All right. So whenever we are clicking on light, right, this function will get called. Then it will check the value for the theme preference. So if it is we are in the dark mode, right, we will switch to the we will try and toggle the light theme class. Okay, so let's see how this is working. When I click on light, you can see that this value was true. Then basically it checked, you know uh, whether the light theme class was applied or not. By default it wasn't. Okay, so if I do a page refresh, we can see that the body tag doesn't have the, you know it doesn't have this class, any class associated with it. The moment I click on light, um let me just move it here so that you guys can see. Okay, so when I click on light, you can see that the light theme class was added, right? And because we have defined the styles over here such that when we're in the dark scheme preference and when the light theme class has been applied, we are resetting the background to these values. Okay, and when I click on this light once again, I mean this button once again, right, now we need to work on how to fix the text. You can see that, it added the it toggled this class. Okay, light theme. So the light theme class was removed, and that is why we are back to whatever was the default styling inside, color scheme preference of dark. Okay, and then what we want to do now is we want to store this information in the local storage. So if whatever the preference the user is setting, that will be respected. If no preference has been set by the user, the operating system preference will be applied. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can do that. Give me a second. I'll try and change the position of the video. Right. um Hopefully now you guys can see it better. Okay, all right. So now what we will do is we'll define a couple of functions which allow us to maintain that information. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to set the button text, right? So let's create a function for that. Set button text, and it will accept the theme value, and based on the preference, we will basically uh, update the text. So we will see theme. Okay, if the theme is dark, we want to show the text as light, and if the theme is not that, we want to show the text as uh, you know dark basically. All right, then what we want to do is first we want to identify uh, what is the theme preference. So let's create a function. Check theme preference. So what this will do is, let's figure out what is the default theme. Let's store that in a variable. Okay, so here we will say const get default theme pref. Okay, or rather the OS theme preference. And what we want to do here is we want to check if this code that we had written over here, what is the value for this. Okay, and we want to check that if this matches you know if this matches basically that means the dark theme is there, right? We want to return that the dark theme is the preference, otherwise we will return light. Okay, so this is giving us the OS level preference, so we will just use this function over here. Then what we want to do is we want to check what is the preference coming from the local storage. We want to save this information in the local storage. So let's do that over here as well. So const, let's call that as the current theme. Okay, and let's create a function get theme pref from local storage. Okay, and let's create a function which takes care of that. All right, and we will just return from here local storage dot get item theme. Okay, all right, then what we want to do is we have both the themes, the operating system level theme as well as the theme coming from the local storage. What we want to check is if current theme is dark, we want to say document, right? Basically this part, right, what we had written over here. So we'll say document dot body dot class list dot toggle dark theme, right? Because now we're reading this from the local storage, we're checking what is the value coming from the local storage. Okay, so we will do that. Otherwise, else if, so we want to store this value in the local storage, right? So we'll just do that. Else if current theme equals light, we want to set the light theme to the body. Okay, and here what we want to do is let theme, let's create a variable, and we want to do theme equals, we want to check if document dot body dot class list contains if it contains um, if this matches, that is what we want to do. And hang on a sec, what we want to do here is we want to check if it contains the light theme, right? In that scenario, we want to return the value as light, and otherwise you want to return the value as dark. Okay, and similarly over here also we'll be setting the value, and we'll check whether it contains the dark theme or not. If it does, then we are returning the dark theme over here, otherwise we're returning the light theme. Okay, then what we will do is we will say local storage dot set item theme. Okay, and whatever is the theme which we are setting, right? So if this is being applied, right, that means the light theme was the preference, and if the dark theme was applied, that means the dark theme was the preference, right? So over here, when we are checking the theme preference from the local storage, okay, we are checking if the value was dark. If that was dark, then we are basically toggling the dark theme, otherwise we are adding the light theme class. Okay, and based on this we want to set the button text, right? So if current theme is there, okay, if we're getting a value from the local storage, we will use that value, whatever is the user selection. Otherwise we will use the default theme which is coming from the operating system preference, right? So let me, actually we don't need the curly brackets because we are just, we have a single execution statement like this. Okay, and let's get rid of this variable, we don't need this. There's a bit of a lag. Anyways, so what we will do now is we will say check theme preference. We'll call this function. Okay, this will basically check whatever is the theme preference and show the data based on that. All right, let's take a look at the local storage as well. So let me close this for now. So there are no key n values available over here, and so the this particular code was executed. It did not find a current theme, right? Because this gave us a null value. Then both of these conditions, it did not go inside this because we did not get anything from the local storage. So basically it picked up the default theme coming from the operating system level, which is dark, right? So we are checking if the theme is dark, then we're showing the text as light. And when it is, otherwise we show the text as dark. Okay. So when I click on light, theme dark preference is not defined. Okay. Hang on a sec. Where is this switch theme? Okay. I need to make this variable available. Where have we defined this variable? Okay, it was defined earlier over there. We need to just add it once again. So const theme preference darks equal this thing. Okay, and we can, instead of this, we can replace this with this variable theme preference dark. Okay, all right, and let's take a look at the application level. All right, when I click on light, okay, we have, this piece of code was executed. If we take at the application, we look at the local storage, we can see that the theme value has been set to light, and that is why the light theme is available, but the text isn't changing. So let's fix that as well. So what we want to do is, when we are, switching the theme and setting it to the local storage, what we want to do is we want to update the button text as well. So we will say check, we will say set button text, and we will pass the value of theme over here. Okay, so now it is showing us the value as dark. When I click on dark, right, the theme value is being updated to dark and the dark theme is being loaded. And if I do a refresh, you can see that it reloaded. The value coming from the current, local storage was dark, so it applied, it toggled this class basically. Okay, it, if we take a look at the body tag, it has this dark theme class applied to it, because that is what we are doing over here, and we're setting the button text accordingly. When I click on light, it is setting the text to dark, and the light theme is being, set over here. Okay, and if we do a refresh, we have this available with us. The preference was of the light theme. Okay, so that is how you can basically handle this using a button, as well as support the OS level. So if we do not, play around with this button, it will always respect the OS level theme. Otherwise, it will respect the user preference, which is stored in the local storage. So let me just clear this for now. Okay, if we do a refresh, you can once again see that the OS level preference is dark. And suppose I want to change the OS preference within Chrome, I want to test this behavior. I will set the color preference to light, so you can see that whatever is the operating system level preference, that is being applied. And if I play with this button, so there is another event which was available to us, right? This one. So we can respond to whenever this change is happening. Okay, so what we can do is theme preference dark dot add event listener change. When that happens, we want to do something. what we want to do is we basically want to call the set button text function, and you know we pass it the theme which is available. So actually, instead of that, what we will do is, let's take a look what is the event that we're getting, and let's log that event over here. Let me comment this out. Okay, I'm switching it to dark. So you can see that this event was fired, and it's telling us that it is matching. If I change it to light, you can see, hang on. Should have logged this. Let me just cross check it once. Okay. Yeah, when we are switching it to light, it is doing that. If we switch it to dark, yeah, now it's working. I think the script wasn't loaded. So let me clear this. When we switch it to light, you can see the value for matches is false, right? And when I switch it to dark, we can see that the value for matches is true. So based on this, we can you know determine what is the text that we need to show, right? So what we will do over here is we can basically call this function over here when that happens. So check theme preference. Okay. And if we are changing the theme from here like this, light, you can see that this value is coming from the local storage. Let me clear this. Let me delete this. Let's do a refresh. Okay. Since we are in the light preference, it is showing us, the light theme, right? If I change it to dark, it is, triggering that event, right? And it's basically checking whatever is the value coming from the local storage. It is doing that. If I change this to dark once again, uh, you can see that the text is there. And now if I change this to light, for example, the theme should still remain as the light theme, because right now it's respecting everything from the local storage, right? So in the local storage, the value of theme is light, and that is how this is working now. Okay, I hope it's clear to you guys how the functionality is working. So this is how you can make use of local storage and add a color theme preference to your website. You can support both the operating system theme preference as well as user specific preference. You can maintain in the local storage and get it from there. Okay, so that is what it is. You can replace this button with an icon of light and for example sun and the moon. And I would as homework, you guys can do the same functionality in the responsive mode, wherein when we click on this menu, we see a link over here for changing the theme. Okay, the same button you can just add over here, which is basically responsible for toggling between the light and dark mode. Okay. All right. So this is it for this session. In case you have any more doubts, we'll cover those in the Discord voice channel. So I'll see you guys there. So good night and take care.